Ladies and gentlemen.
Only the best internet radio station in the world.
Ooh, yeah!
No, the universe.
The Kota iRadio Network.
Back by popular demand.
Woo!
Now about to witness the strength of street knowledge.
I'm your DJ.
DjBBQ.
It's done over 400 events.
Ooh, yeah!
5, 4, 3,
2, 1.
Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands in the air.
Let's get ready to rumble! This is UnCut Live. Now, here's DjBBQ. DjBBQ with the Kota iRadio Network, and we are on UnCut Live. We are here with the Thunder from Down Under. We're here from the live wire, Johnny Parks. Johnny, thank you for being on the show. I appreciate it. Wanted to go and see you wrestle against Sin Bodhi, like we were talking about off camera, in Sioux Falls, South Dakota at Midwest All Pro Wrestling, the greatest little city in South Dakota, like Eugene likes to say. Right?
Gene impersonation.
Right? How you been, man? It's good to see you. Good to talk to you.
Thanks for getting hold of me and having me on your podcast here. This is phenomenal, DJ. It's what a great little town, what a great time out there. Sin Bodhi, what a great competitor. I think I've still tooth up here. I'm gonna have to send him my dental bill one day.
Right? So here's a question. If you remember that? Was that the match that he decided to attack Amanda Messing in the audience and sat down on her when you guys, because I remember you guys were trying to throw him into the street because he was trying to backhand you and blindside you. I remember that. Right. But I think that's when because I had the referee, Amanda Messing, for Midwest All Pro Wrestling on here not too long ago. And we were talking about that, and she said she got off scared because you guys really were brawling out there, which likely you had the reason to. I mean, he did hit you pretty damn good.
That's right. Now I thought, well, this is what I'm going to do, Mr. Bodhi. I'm going to put you on my shoulders, and I'm going to throw you into an oncoming vehicle. Evidently, the road was busy at the time. By the time I carried him out there was no traffic. Of course, I think he rolled me up and banged my head on the concrete and just about knocked myself out. But yeah, thinking of you, Nick. I'll find him again, Bodhi. I'm coming for you.
Right on. So what have you been up to? I mean, obviously the elephant in the room, you have the evil empire, not allowing us to go because it's a virus. I call it the evil empire because, it's taken over. Yeah. How's that been for you? Has business been booming or has it been kind of rough?
Well, as you can see, as we're doing our lovely podcast here, I'm in my deep down basement right now with my fireplace here with the king's weapons behind me up on the wall. I've been living down here and, of course, keeping safe, avoiding contact and doing the right thing here and keeping health and everyone around you and, of course, yourself and doing everything right there, DJ. But it's I think the important thing here is following the protocol that's been set by the professionals, It's like what we do here and looking after yourselves and taking care of those around you. So long story short, I've been locked down in my basement here for the last 9 months, hence the beard is now almost hit the ground and various other hairs on my body that I need to trim up and shave. I won't show you these on the camera, of course, but it's I'm enjoying a nice hot coffee down here, enjoying the warmth down here by the fireplace, but it's been very slow. And I think for most of us in all of this business and in the wrestling game and entertainment industry, music, whatever you do in that side, has been slow for all of us. It won't be much longer, and we're just going to hang on for a little while longer. be vigilant with our protection of each other and ourselves, and we'll get there. It'll come around again, and we'll be back up and running. I'll be 105 when it happens, but I'll still be out there with my walker, you know.
Well, hey, at that point, let's cheers there, pal. We'll cheers with our little holiday mugs there.
Holiday mugs, yeah. What's up? Thank you very much. But yeah, it'll be all right, and it will pick up, and I think we'll come back with a blazing storm, and I think the whole system will be changed.
Right.
Personally, what I think is a lot of the ones that were running on the bare skin and bones, they unfortunately will fall by the wayside. That's a sad and terrible thing. But those with an integrally good business ethic and structure, they will survive, and they'll come along, and everybody will putt along, and I think you'll get the cream of the crop and rise to the top. When I steal that. Ooh, yeah. You know,
dig it.
I have to tell you that story I did with Sherry Martell when we were on the road together. You know.
Hey, we'll get into that. That would be really cool.
Good old Sherry. I'm good. Rest in peace, Sherry. We had some
God bless.
And Sherry would come out, and I would I put on my hat and my sunglasses and be Randy.
Yeah.
And we the streets, and of course with her there, just verified everything.
Right.
Coming up, and then we because those days both of us smoked. Terrible habit. Don't take up smoking. Anybody listening? I've been sober smoking for 4 years. So it was a good 10 years ago when Sherry and I did this. But we go out for a cigarette and we go back in, and she goes, "Well, Parks, it's time for another smoke." And I go, "Well, all right, let's go." She goes, "You should be somebody else." And I said, "I'll get me a bandana. I wrap that around there and out there, and I'm start doing the X and chopping and being Sean." Signing every kid that was coming up to the arena. We're doing a big show there, doing the X-Pac signature on their thing. So I was both Randy and X-Pac for the evening. But we carried that on the whole tour and had a lot of fun with that as we went down. It's amazing how people think that. And I even pulled off a friend of ours, Al Snow, a couple of times. So I'd shave down, put the handlebar mustache on, the Fu Manchu, and do an Al Snow. But
so I got a question, though. Have you gotten any ideas on some hobbies that you haven't done that you kind of just caught up on? Because like with me, I'm doing graphic design and stuff. So I kind of, tried something new, try to do new avenues and stuff. Is there anything that you've kind of went back into what you used to like a hobby, or have you tried something new to learn something different that kind of would maybe evolve and excel your career and anything else that you're doing?
Great question. Before I got into wrestling back in the day in 1872, Johnny Parks was a musician.
Oh, right.
So I've been playing a lot of bands over the years and touring and stuff from backs. And again, I'm blowing a big trumpet here, but I was fortunate enough to pick up tours with Kiss and Bon Jovi and ZZ Top and the likes over the years, and not in the bands, but as support acts and touring with them. But I really put that on the shelf as wrestling picked up throughout, and it got that peak in the early 2000s again.
Yeah.
When we really got busy for a while, for a couple of years. So I put everything on the shelf for that. And now this has been a great time to get back into in these last 9 months. And I was doing regular gigs on the side and stuff now, but it gave you a lot of time to connect with a lot of fellow musicians, because we're all sitting in our basements and you got a guitar in hand and a microphone and start writing and playing and rehearsing and learning stuff again, and rediscovering yourself as a player,
Right.
So, like you've been doing with your fantastic graphics that I've seen of your work, it's like,
thank you.
Now I've got the time and it's fantastic. I might have to put you on board on the Parks Express here about that.
That'll be awesome.
We'll talk after the podcast.
There you go.
We'll, it opened up a lot of doors to be able to connect and do that stuff. Now you've got so much free time on your hands, and I'm not going anywhere, and people I haven't seen, including family members, for almost 12 months now.
Yeah.
But I really got down and embellished on that. And that's been the biggest bonus out of all this entirety is be able to do those skills. A lot of other stuff I've picked up too. I've become an avid little gardener of my property and stuff, and I've learned how to do a lot of household stuff and learned those tricks of the trades now to stay so busy. So it's been advantageous in that prospect. So I can grow some plants and keep them alive for more than 6 minutes now. So I'm getting there. They stay alive for now. So I'm climbing the ladder to a green thumb.
There you go. So like a lot of the viewers and listeners, we have a lot of new ones, and some, might or may not know. You give us a little taste on where you got started, and it's the same old, question, but give us a little taste of where you got started and how you got the bug for professional wrestling.
Yeah, great question, my friend. It started way back in the early days. I was a long history as I was doing music and touring. I'd also picked up another little trait of the day, which was popular in the 80s, was, of course, dancing. So as an entertainer, I was actually on tour of Japan, not as wrestling at that stage, but as a dancer. So I'd run into the guys that had shot the movie Over the Top with Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Professor and Scott Norton and all that were over there, world-class arm wrestlers.
Yeah.
And that was Ricky Rude, by the way, too, was another world-class champion arm wrestler. And I'd run over there and I'd competed in a couple of arm wrestling things and met these guys. And, Willie Wellington was the contact at the time. And one of Brad Regan's guys. Anyway, so he said, come on, you got to come over to the States and learn to wrestle. You know, you look great and we'll have a spot for you. This is the early end of the AWA days. And so I packed up my bags and came to Minnesota, which I didn't know anything was because there was no internets in these days. And
yeah,
Minnesota was New York and LA was all the same thing to a foreigner. So I loaded up here and landed in January. So I get on the plane and I'm waiting to get picked up by Sodbuster Kenny J's nephew, JB Trask. And I'm on the plane and I land in there. Pilots on the air says, Captain Jack speaking, and we're at 10,000 feet up. Cabin air pressure outside here is minus 30. Temperature on land at MSP Airport is minus 42. So I...
welcome to the States.
So I sort of absorbed this for a second, and then I look over to the guy sitting next to me and I go, hey, did you hear that? And he goes, yeah. And then I see him reach under the seat. And we're coming into the landing position, you know, the circle as we come down to land. And he puts a jacket on. Right? And at the time, I'm wearing a singlet like this. And, of course, this was the very, very late 80s, early 90s, where parachute pants were the fad. Can't touch this. Boom, doing it.
There you go.
Plastic pants. So that's all I was wearing with a pair of flip-flops. I just flew out of Japan, which was enjoying some nice weather in Yokohama. Anyway, so I get here and... he's putting the jacket on and you know, laughing away. And I'm like, 42 down there and it's 30. I'm 10,000 feet in the air. All right. So we get down and, of course, you go into the runway from the plane to the airport, that big tunnel. As you come into MSP, as everyone here knows. And I could feel the cold air. God, they've got to turn this air conditioning off. You know, it's not that hot yet, you know. Let's turn that aircon down. So I get out there and there I run into JB Trask. And JB's there with the jacket on and smoking days again. Of course, everybody out there don't smoke.
Yeah.
Famous Yule Brynner line, whatever you do, don't smoke.
Right.
And, we go out, he says, we'll go out to the airport. As you see, where you pick your luggage up and you wait, you know, an hour before it turns up, of course.
Right.
International flight, you see the big double doors open up and you go outside and have a cigarette. So I look out there, there's a guy with a balaclava and there's coats on and there's smoke everywhere. There's just smoke. What's going on? Is there a fire? And why is he wearing goggles and this face mask? So JB's laughing away and says, here, he gives me a cigarette, so let's go smoke. So we walk out, those doors open up automatically, and we walk straight outside, and I take this breath, and it's got to be 25 below still at this stage. I take this breath, and I go, good God, and the cigarette falls out of my mouth. And I look at him, and JB's lighting his smoke. Laughing away. And he goes, and I realised that's not smoke, that's steam.
Yeah.
It's always coming off the vehicles. The guy's wearing all the stuff because it's that damn cold.
Right.
And it's down and my right leg burns. I was like, stinging. I'm going, what the hell is this? So I reached down to my parachute pants, as anyone of that age would know what they're made of. It's plastic, and I pinched the leg, and they snapped.
Oh.
These pants I have these pants today with the big split in them. They actually froze and split when I squeezed them on the thigh. So I ran back in there, and he thought that was hilarious, and he was knocking on the glass and waving at me and enjoying my suffering as I froze to death and tried to find my bag so I could get some extra clothes on. But that was my introduction of January the 2nd or whatever I arrived here in Minnesota. So long story there, but to get back on topic, as I segued out there, of course, has come here and train at the Eddie Sharkey camp at the time. You know, as everybody out there knows, Eddie Sharkey, trainer of champions.
Yep.
People like Jesse Ventura and Road Warriors and Ricky Rude and Kurt, all the guys out of the area of the day. I sort of came in just a little bit after Sean Waltman, and Jerry Lynn and I, and Lenny Lane. There was a bunch of that time that went through camp together, and it was a great time. I got introduced to 300-pound, 7-foot giants like Charlie Norris and Axe and Demolition.
Yeah.
Scott Norton, and the monsters of the day of the old school. And I was the original territorial Spike Dudley at that time, and all of 200 pounds and sprightly 20-something-year-old. So I came in, and I remember first day of camp, and I was top rope suplexed by each one of them. And I think today I walk with a funny limp.
If you don't, I would be surprised. Like, those are some big men that are going to be doing that move.
It was an amazing stuff. No, I'm having a Percocets right now, but we won't talk about that. Anyways,
all right.
We got through that first day, and now I didn't even make it the ring to the second day. We trained on the grass. You had to earn your colours to even get in the ring, and it took 6 months. And the schooling, of course, there was very, very strict and daily, as to what is today. And we can talk about the barefoot 10 miles to school theory of us old boys, but it really was that, and it went through hell or high water to earn your right to even get in the ring, and everybody there at JB Trash, they all took their liberties, and enjoyed the new blood, as so to speak. And in those days we didn't have fluxes of the big schooling and camps of today, so it was very individualized too. So you got good quality training because there's really more than one or two of you coming through at each time to be trained. There wasn't such an industry flood of people getting into the sport. So we spent the training there, and I got trained up there, and went through my bumps and bruises, and worked in the territory here for quite some time, and then moved on down south, back to Japan, and eventually ended up back in the mid-90s back to Aussie and started reworking out there again, which is a blossoming scene at the time. And did great success over there, and had a great little career in Aussie, and then got the call up to come back here, and ended up back here, and probably at the end of the 90s, and reset up camp here in Minnesota because it was the original ground of where I first landed, so. Yeah. And had some negotiations with WCW at the time, was going to move to Atlanta, and then ended up working with some other companies over the time, with WWF, non-contract, that come in and do a lot of work. Actually, I hold a not a very glorious honor, but the longest employee of WWF to never have a contract. I started my first, what we call going doing the jobs, which was what you call enhancement talent today.
Okay.
Was done very early, almost 25 years ago. And again, I just worked just a couple of years ago for him. So in that period of time, and it was sporadic, every 6 to 12 months to 18 months I would work for the company, but was never signed on. And became a running joke in the locker room, and with all the people, everyone from Molly Holly to Victoria to even Mysterio, we'd always joke, why aren't you signed yet? So it was always the running joke.
Yeah.
And actually, I used to have a running joke with Tommy Dreamer, and we still today, when we cross paths on the circuits, would laugh about that. He says, you got to bring your bag. I said, you're not going to do anything with me anyway. So and I would turn up for years on end and just eat catering and be there. Yeah. And on the odd promo, I did some promos with Brock Lesnar and some matches with Kai and Tai in the early days, and a few bits and pieces over the years with guys, but it was very sporadic in between. So most of the time I just didn't even bring a bag. I'd turn up there, enjoy the great catering, wherever we were, from Detroit to, it was always in the 5-state area. Some of it was south, and jump down and do the show, eat the thing, hang with everybody. And go in the gorilla position. If people don't know, there's a blackboard. I think it's still there today, where you go see the matches lined up, and you'd have everything put on for the night's events. So you go check the blackboard, go get your check, your cash at the time out of the money guy. And Timmy White was our cash guy back in the day. Good old Timmy. And we'd just go down and eat catering. Well, not on tonight. And we'd go and play cribbage. So it was ironic because I spent so much time in the locker room, not involved in the shows whilst being there. I'd always see who came through and who was basically in the doghouse. Yeah. Over the time, because they would always be back there with me. So I had great games of cribbage and stuff with people like Jeff Hardy, in trouble for doing whatever he did because he'd be in the would be used. Haku, whoever was in trouble at the time would be sitting in the locker room and we play cards because we weren't doing anything for the whole night.
I'd be a little intimidated playing cards with Haku because you hear these legendary stories that if he got mad, it didn't turn out well.
What a gentle giant,
Yeah.
I've got we don't call him Haku. It's once you're personal with him, it's Tonga. And Tonga was a great card player. Not that you'd ever try and cheat either, but just a gentle giant. Just you never saw that side. He was always a personable gentleman and very humble and very friendly. And I've run into him since over the years, and he's always been the same. But yes, it holds a legendary status. I've never seen anything myself personally, but a lot of people I've talked to and know will vouch for it too. And generally, I wouldn't want to be on the bad side. He's one of those guys, much like Calloway, Undertaker. It's a terrifying thing to look at. He's quite the ominous presence when you look up at the 7-footer looking down on you, and he lurches on you, and he's quite the sight. But that was the times we did there. So I spent that time there at WWF doing that. And in between there, of course, I'd pilfer over to the old TNA when we were based out. And we're doing pay-per-views weekly at that stage in Nashville. And, of course, mutual friend of ours, Sin Bodie, and we met there. That's where Sin and I struck up a great relationship, and we would tour that South area a lot together, down into Memphis for Jerry Lawler and a lot of the territories in Alabama. And the wrestling's very prominent in the South and has a viral crowd that we don't see up here in the North. Not since the Vern days, and people who have been around since the Vern would understand what I'm saying right now. It was very rabid then. That still carries on today in the South. And once you get into that back end belt there, you've got Grandpa who's 155, not out.
Still goes.
Still goes. He's got no shoes on and a pair of overalls. And he's got little Bubba. Both of them have got no teeth, and the baby. 20 people in the family, and they're all viral. They are just absolutely and I remember trading stories with a friend of mine, Jim Cornette, and many people might know who he is, a very, very famous manager. But we'd trade stories of that where the fans would get very violent, and they still do that. They're fully vested in the product, fully vested in the sport, and if you're not on the good side, they'll come for you. And old Pappy, I've seen many a time jump in the ring there. 155, about to break a hip, but he's coming with a stick. How dare you? And he's coming. So it was a great atmosphere. It was a lot of good times down there. And I hope to get back down there one day when everything clears up and it's all safe out there again to continue on and do a little bit more work down there. So I went to the TNA run for a while, and then had little short spurts over at WCW and other sort of major independents that were blossoming at the time. That was the sort of start of the indies, as it's called. But it's a label. Some people call it something else. A lot of the Southerners will call them outlaw things. Whatever it is, it's smaller, non-promotional, non-big companies at the time. Once the territories collapsed and were absorbed by the McMahons, it changed the whole perspective of the time. So it really was a different world where you could camp and stay in an area for X amount of weeks, and then you would shop off to the next area, and enjoy that, and then come back again, and refresh yourself. And it was a great touring aspect. So all kids keep working. And now once that was dried up, these small indies came in, and thank God they did, because it provided some work for a lot of people.
Right.
Because the big companies were sort of locking door. They were either signed on or you really didn't have any work.
Yeah.
It really changed the whole perspective of the business. So I got to that element for a bit, and I got back into a little bit of music back then. Took a little break for a year or so and rethought everything, got over a couple of injuries, and it sort of kicked up gear, and we had a great resurgence in the last 5-6 years now of some great companies. What we were talking about earlier over there with Eugene and Sioux Falls, great little territory almost built up,
Now, I was just going to ask you, when you were around, you remember the territories like I do and all that. You were there. I was just on the, the fan side, eating the popcorn, eating a bunch of food, making sure I was, being a healthy adult. Do you see any similarities? Because I'd like to ask this to the veterans. Do you see a lot of similarities with what the territories were then to now? Because you have some of these, it kind of, territory type, independent, big name. Do you see that similarity now?
when these areas, and I do, it's a great question again. I see that in some, definitely with what Eugene has built up there, and it's isolated over there in Sioux Falls. You got very little to the west, and nothing until you hit the Twin Cities. And the Twin Cities has been a very stagnant territory since Vern left. There's been a few blossoms.
Yeah.
Domain was a big run, and 20 years ago we had a big territory. Still Domain. We have other successful companies there, of course, a little bit north with we talked about Heavy on Wrestling.
Yep.
But there's been some good, solid companies that have done well. AWF was doing very well for a number of years. So there's been those, but the gap between the two is so large, and it allowed over there at Midwest to be its territory in itself. There was no competitors.
Yeah.
Coming in, and you could build and create your own world, and that's a key factor to bringing back the old days, I think. And he's able to do that and bring people in. As I said, Sid Bodie, Billy Gunn, myself, a lot of people can come through and be brought in as attractions, and have cycled out and have a core group that's there. The great company that it is, and that's what territory. And you've got a vet like Eugene who knows what's going on. I've sung his praise a millions of times, and he can recreate because he was back there in the day. Yeah. So simulated that, done a phenomenal job. I'm very proud of what he's done, and glad to be part of it, and always willing to come back and be a part of it again. And it's a very respectful, very professional outfit, and he does well, and I hope he continues for some many years. And again, that's starting up around the country as well too. Booker T runs a great little area down there.
Yep.
Stuff's starting to come back. The Florida areas are starting to build up. They're saturated with the big TV companies down there now. But I think the more isolated you are and create back what people want, and people do want that. They don't like the different styles that have now come along, different variants of wrestling, but they want that to be theirs. Much like, people loved Metallica before they were big, right? Because it was their band, and nobody else knows it. But their core following of those beginning years was still large enough to be a very profitable and successful outfit in that side of entertainment. So we can do that. All entertainment in itself, whether it's sport orientated, from NASCAR to wrestling to horse racing, which runs on the same parameters. Yeah. As sports entertainment, people spit at that phrasing, but I think it's a very correct phrasing because it is sports entertainment. We are a sport and we are entertaining. Right. Much like NASCAR and horse racing is. Their results are not exactly what they should be either, but, that's what it boils down to, and the very successful franchises in all of them, And again, we can create the same thing, and people want to see that again and want to belong. They pick their drivers, they pick their horses, they pick their wrestlers, And I think we give that option to people. I think you'll see a resurgence because we've seen a big decline in wrestling over the years, sadly. Yeah, we've seen bigger exposure. I've had this debate amongst the old boys when we get to the Cauliflower Alley and such, is wrestling bigger than it is, And yes, the exposure is larger. We have more mediums and platforms to show it, but it's not as big as a thing as it was. And it was even way before my time. We're talking the 60s and 70s was you drawing 10, 15,000 people on a Tuesday night. Yeah, it was even here in the Twin Cities. What Vern was doing was on a larger scale than we've ever seen. And we haven't given the people that product and that sportsmanship back and that territorial area for them to follow. So we call it what we've done, and we're watching imported programs from other parts of the country and world now, to get your needs. And we need to create, and hopefully people like Eugene can bring that up there and get some more exposure, but still retain their area, and we'll have some success with that indeed,
So that's kind of cool because I never got to really see those. I've always heard about the territory days. So basically I get a better concept. I had a concept, but I get a better concept now. So with Midwest All Pro Wrestling, Magnum, PWP 3 times, Heavy on Wrestling, also with First Wrestling up there in the cities. My other question was, that a lot of people always hear that if you come from New Japan, All Japan, it's the strong style. And then the States has it, and the lucha. With some of these individuals that will watch us and listen to this that may not have heard or able to ask this question, but I'm going to ask the question, what is different in Aussie with wrestling, professional wrestling, sports entertainment, that it is over here in the States?
Well, it's, in my anecdotal opinion, of course, because people would say other things as well too. Wrestling in Aussie was very big in the 70s. There was the John Tollus area where you had people like Andre and Bruno would tour through the New Zealand and the islands and Hawaii, and wrestling was a major product there. Through with Mario Milano was a homegrown star there during the 60s and 70s, and this was a vibrant wrestling culture, and it died as like a dinosaur death.
Okay.
At the 80s and into the 90s, there was no wrestling in Australia at all.
Really?
Yes. There was the odd little sporadic show, a little bit in the main capital, a few leftovers from that era. George Julio, the Hitman, was one from that area with Mario Milano and Super Mario. Those guys were leftovers of that era now, and they ran some shows, but it was very sporadic and small scale little venues. So it never got embellished and embossed, and actually I never knew of it in Australia, hence why I ended up in the US.
Yeah.
Never knew of any wrestling school or wrestling in the country at that stage. And then it blossomed. And it blossomed on a company called Ring of Honor.
Oh, wow.
Tape trading became very popular in the 90s.
Yep.
And those tapes made it to Australia. And that became the benchmark of what it is. And Ring of Honor from those days to today is, again, now a different product. And those earlier days was a product that was ahead of its time, I think. And it was a different style that wasn't quite acceptable to a lot of people of my genre and my generation. But it was the thing, and that's all that country got. So the leftovers were sort of pushed to the side, and this influx of tape trading created what we saw today. And wrestling became boomed in Australia from the mid-90s up to the 2000s, and is enlarged today with multiple companies everywhere, independent companies, with great but with a very new style, which is flash in the pan burn style. So it doesn't have the longevity of what we created in the early days. So it's very circular. You go through so many people and so many venues and so many, because it's so fast. It doesn't allow the product to build. So you've got to put everything on the plate like a buffet, and then serve them up a new buffet the following night. That tends to burn everything out a lot quicker than it does with just serving one dish at a time. So, and to use that analogy, so wrestling got saturated with that. It's now very popular over there with great drawing and a lot of tours. I think WWF made its first tour there in 2000, which I finally negotiated with WWF at the time.
Yeah.
And a good friend of mine actually got the deal at the time, Nathan. And you might remember the big 7-foot guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Nathan Jones just came in just after. And, of course, Nathan got the deal that I never did because, well, look at Nathan Jones. Now, I might be a big guy, but that's a 7-foot, 300 pounds.
Yeah, don't sell yourself short. You mean you're a tall dude. Like, Sin isn't short by any means, and I've seen you on the video, so you're a tall dude, but Nathan.
He's a bigger guy than both of us.
Yeah.
And that's the attraction at the time of what WWF was looking for was monsters, and Nathan knows. And what a gentle giant and a great friend of mine. You might know from the Mad Max movies and stuff. He's a very successful actor over the years now since leaving WWF. But he was brought in for that tour and brought to Aussie. We were in negotiations through Arn Anderson and Tom Pritchard at the time, who were running the office, to fly me into Aussie, and which would have been my coming out moment, in your home country with the biggest company in the world, would have been my signing glory. But that was eventually ex-named at the end. So they'd hit Aussie in about 2000, I think 2001, and wrestling just went through the roof. WCW went down. There was a lot of international touring companies of mine. There's an AWF in Sydney run by a very successful local wrestler, Greg Bowers, their TNT. He has a great setup down there, very professional, flies in a lot of great talent from around the world. I worked for this company for a number of years whilst down there. So they're bringing this influx, and it'd be very successful. So it's still to this day is doing great business down there. And I think most of the big companies will get down there still regularly on a basis and draw big arena crowds and stadium crowds. And And it's a popular thing down there now. But it was raised on that thing. So the independent scene is simmering. Not a lot of talent has come out. I was, again, without blowing trumpets, I think one of the very first outside of Kangaroo Jack to work for WWF.
Okay.
Since he was, and we talk about the Bushwhackers with the Kiwis.
Yeah. I wasn't going to mention anything.
I talked to them boys down. I've been down to the boys. They got a gym in Clearwater down in Florida. But they came in and they worked on the same premise. I learned a lot from them because they were the generation before me, and how to negotiate wrestling around the world. So I got a lot of lessons off them guys and how to do it and how it works. It was quite complex with the working visas and immigration and such. But yeah, those guys, built a great thing. But that whole era between Outback Jack and there was nothing else. And then there was Nathan, and they got a sour taste after that. I think there's a lot of girls have come through that trained up with Lance in Edmonton there, Canada. Yeah. I think it's where his camp is. Lance, a great trainer, brought them through. So they've hired some new Aussie girls in the companies there, been through, which is kind of ironic because they used to come as little girls and watch us back in Australia. I remember kids, and I've done some podcast interviews over in Australia. And, well, I was 5 years old and I come and saw you. Now you're aging me. And you were 25 when you saw me, right? And,
right.
And it was, they'd come along to the shows and whether we were inspired or not, but they came along and suddenly working for the big companies now. So the girls had a lot more success. Not many guys came. Nathan was one of the last, and because Nathan left the way he did, to this day, wasn't there, so I'm not going to quote anything I don't know, of course.
Yeah,
right. As we've talked about personally with him, without spilling beans of anything he doesn't want me to share, but it just didn't work for him, left on his own accord, and we'll leave it at that. But there was no other Aussies after that into the major company. I think they've got a young kid now who came out of one of my friends' camps down there. I think it might have been the Bounds camp. Young guy, and God, the name has skipped me because I don't keep up to date with the wrestling, but on television now. But Brady, he was one of the 205s and was working in the.
Okay, yeah.
Staying now, he's now married to one of the girls there now too. But as you take too many bumps, as you know, your memory starts to fade. And if I wander off screen here, and I start doddering and talking to an invisible cat, you'll understand why. So too many pile drivers, and you end up forgetting exactly where you are. I'm alive and well. Where am I?
I blame Sid. He punched you in the mouth, and everything just went south.
I did, especially that tooth. I'm still wiggly woggly. There'll be rectification for that, or a bill, one of the two. I'll sit and get Jim Cornette on him. But, so that was the basic synopsis of Australian wrestling at the stage. And, of course, I've had some contact back through the internet since this time, but I haven't been back to Australia since 08, 09. So it's been a good 12, 13 years now, 14 years since I've been back there. So it's active and it's good down there. But wrestling, at the heart of wrestling, and I've said this on many interviews, many talks and meet and greets, has always been the US. I think the heart of wrestling is an American style, and it's really what drew me here. Was the art. And I started wrestling, and I was like most young 20-year-olds. I wasn't fully developed at that age, and all of 200 pounds, and wasn't wise at all. Still not wise, but I pretend. And I'm still not 200 pounds. I'm trying to get back to that now. I kind of like that weight back then, but. This is where it was always at. The legend, especially the Midwest. It was globally what I experienced was Midwest wrestling. Vince had minimal exposure during the early 80s when I started seeing what wrestling was, but most of it came out of Vern stuff. That's the tapes that were making it abroad. Yep. When you went to the video store, if anybody's out there the same age, there used to be video stores. Yeah.
Well, speaking of all Midwest, like with WWF at the time, I can name off Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, Mean Gene, Andre the Giant, Legion of Doom. Like, most of them were in the AWA. They went over there. Like, that's your Hall of Famers basically came from the Midwest.
It's where it all started. And I'll admit that from everything. I think this was the greatest promotion here. Period. I think the AWA to this day, as a fan watching it myself, if I step out of my skin and look back, I'll watch an AWA match. I'll watch some. I'm a big fan of Mid-South. I love the Watts era stuff.
Yep.
Big Watts fan too. There was other territories on par, but that was what got out. They didn't have the exposure that Vern could get, so those tapes were making it to the old country. And I spent some time back to us. I went to in the 80s. I was back in school in England as well too. As people may not know, I'm a crossbreed, English Aussie, and so I spent some time in England, and that was what's reaching there too. Yeah. And there was a what we call catch over there in England.
Okay.
Catch wrestling was prominent there too, but again, a smaller scale. Really got its boom in the last 20 years. But not digressing back to that, the AWA was so prominent, and that's what we saw. That led me on to researching the Florida territories with Eddie Graham and the Bill Watts, the global stuff down there, and the UWF, and all the variants that changed over the years. The Von Erich era, stuff down there in Texas.
I was just going to ask you about that. I had somebody that brought it to my attention about the Sportsatorium, and I put out a post, and it's been getting a lot of attraction. Did you ever perform at the Sportsatorium, the legendary, like basically the all be all professional wrestling of Texas, which is the Von Erich country?
Fortunately, I haven't.
Oh,
that is definitely a bucket list.
Yeah.
That's right up there with the Louisville Gardens. It's right up there with the garden itself. I haven't had the fortune. That's been Vince's territory. I was never booked whilst working for WWF to be in that venue. I never had that chance. Very envious of that. That's the mecca there. Yeah, thank God the Sportatorium was the mecca too. And there was the Louis Gardens, and of course there's the Boston Gardens were another one. That I didn't get a chance to. So, but I did cross off some great ones that were on it. I did enjoy. I was in the Tokyo Dome was the other one. I was never a big Japanese fan, even though I went over there several times.
Yeah.
I never wrestled the Tokyo Dome. It was the big leagues there when I was working. Yeah. Companies were in that league, but I really topped off one was the Rosemont Horizon was a huge one for me, which is now called something else, All State or something.
Yeah.
But that was always a big mecca because WrestleMania 3 was there,
Yeah.
And I wrestled the Perth Hall back in Australia, which was a big venue there. Rod Laver Arena in Sydney. That was one of the major venues of that country, and several other ones down there in Auckland. There was a great. I've forgotten the names because I should have wrote this stuff down because I still can't remember, and I've got no excuse. But there was, a lot of places I'd have to go back over, and I will do once we're done here, and go, oh yeah, that place I should have mentioned it. But yeah, I'd never got the Sportatorium. Back to the point, and it was something I'd love to go down and do. I don't know who runs there now, and.
I think they ended up, somebody bought it, and I don't think they were taking care of it that well, and I think they might have tore it down, if I remember right. And because I'm going off and looking here on my phone, and I think that's what somebody was saying, because I was going through there real quick so I could ask you that question, and I think the gentleman, I think they did unfortunately do that. Another place I got to ask you, well, I'll ask you, what does the Sportatorium mean to you as a professional wrestler?
It was one of the megas, and you're right too. I think that takes my memory a lot there. I think that's exactly what happened down there. That ran to ruin. The Sportatorium was, at its time, it was a regular venue when I started. It was noted, and the shows were done there. You wanted to get there because you wanted to be part of that territory and booked and working and being regular. The money was good down there, and people were working well together. And that was part of the business back then, is you worked together to make money.
Yep.
It was selfless, a lot more selfless. There was some, but it was less selfish than it is today, unfortunately. But that Sportatorium was, towards the end, when it gained its legendary status, it was too far gone to get there, unfortunately. It was more of a hindsight thing of that's what that happened. This is where this person come from. There was when Mick Foley used to do the bumps off the apron. Stories that were told, how it always would freeze in winter down there, and there was no HVAC, and all the stories that come from people who've been in the Sportatorium and told their stuff. Really embellished it a lot, and it became a place. But of course, the time had gone, and there was no one running. And had I been to those sort of venues, I'd never even been to the venue at the time either. I didn't do much work. It was more up toward the funk area in Amarillo.
Yeah.
Texas was up in the northern panhandle style, so I never got down towards the Houston territory. Paul Bosch was running down there in the day. And that was another successful one too in Houston. But yeah, I never got down to a lot of that area at the time. I petered out and gone back to Aussie and into Europe at that stage on different tours. So I missed out on a little bit there. That's something I regret. Had I known at the time, I definitely would have jumped on board and tried to get down there a little more. But I was lucky to get over into Memphis and work the areas down there and some legendary stuff there and the legendary fairgrounds in Nashville, And,
Yep.
Enjoy those great venues. Again, I missed out on the big ones. I worked the big one at the Atlanta Dome there. So there's been some great venues, and not all of them have to be the big ones.
No.
So
Some of them were, small. One thing that was actually, I guess, that's not small, but it's really big that sticks to my mind that also was in that category of the Sportsatorium was the Pontiac Silverdome, just because of what happened during that WrestleMania and all that. Did you ever get to attend there to go to that event? Do you remember that day when that happened, like how that changed wrestling?
I did, and I think that was one of the greatest moments of wrestling history together. I mean, they'll always embellish anybody. I have seen pictures of the Pontiac in its disarray, another absolutely disastrous. I think the company owned 4 of them. 4 throw in the silver, and the whole chain went down. Anyway, I don't know enough about it, but that moment when that happened, what year was that? 83.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was 83 when that happened.
In 83 when we watched that, and for people at that stage, I hadn't broken in the business yet. I was still just a couple of years off yet.
Yeah,
got into wrestling. So as a fan watching that, and God, I was rooting for Andre.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I was an Andre guy, and I met Terry a few times, and it always been pleasant. But I was never a Hogan fan.
Yeah.
And, that minute there when he picked him up, I was like, good God, you're going to die in a minute, because he didn't really quite get him up.
Right.
And funny enough, Andre had been slammed by many other friends and people I've known over the years too. And
I've had that argument with people. I've had that argument that he never really picked him up. But you know who actually really did pick him up? Kamala.
Yes.
I've seen videos of it. I tried to search. Somebody finally put one out. I swear Kamala actually picked him up, not Hogan. So I've had arguments on that. So it's kind of good to hear that, like, somebody else say that he didn't really fully pick him up.
Oh, there's a lot of people out there. I think Pedro Morales slammed him.
Yeah.
A lot of people. Andre would go up for whoever Andre wanted to go up for.
Right.
Andre was at the end, and he was very, very ill and very sick, and did a wonderful thing for wrestling.
Yeah.
That brings shivers to me for what he gave back. He is Andre to me, and I think to millions out there, is the epitome of wrestling.
Yep. That's
the most famous. Nothing else compares. You can rattle off your Hogans and your Stone Colds and even your San Martinos, who I think number 2 guy in the world. Your Flairs. That's Andre the Giant. Every 5-year-old in this world knows who Andre the Giant is.
Oh yeah.
And he's the most cross-broad, and he simplifies wrestling even more than Hulk Hogan's ever done, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And what he did right then for wrestling and for himself, because he didn't have to do anything he didn't want to at any stage, any given time.
Oh, yeah.
Largest human on the planet. What were you going to, Hogan, you're a giant, but you weren't going to do a thing unless Andre allowed you to do anything, And he went up like a bag of potatoes, but ended up breaking Hogan's rib. I think he broke a rib. Yeah, it was painful. You could see him grimace, but that moment with that slam and the pin, was pivotal to so much. It really solidified wrestling and brought it to that bigger thing. He's a great visionary with Vince McMahon. People talk stories, and I've had great times with Vince,
Right.
including the time I spilled coffee on him. And I'll tell a quick story here. So I was at the Hall of Fame one time. I think it's the last time I told this story doing it.
Yeah.
In the Hall of Fame, and Vince had come up. This was in the era where everybody was cutting the hair. We all had long hair, and Vince was going on a tirade about cutting hair. So they'd got to be 2005, I think. So we had everybody from Jericho to Edge to Hunter. They all had these bob cuts. They wouldn't cut all the hair off. If you remember that era, that's because of Vince. And even Tom Pritchard, because Tom would call me all the time, said, well, you're going to come down to TV tapings. Have you cut your hair? For people out there who might not know, Tom Pritchard, of course, is Bruce Pritchard's brother.
Yep.
One of Heavenly Bodies, one of Jim Cornette's great guys from out of Smoky Mountain. And of course, he worked with WWF for a long time as well, too. And he was running the book at the time, and he dealt with all us uncontracted workers.
Yeah.
And he'd call me, I'm a hair guy, you know that I've cut my hair. And I'm like, yeah, you sign the paper and I'll cut my hair, Tom.
Yeah, right.
Not until then, because I've watched so many people come through and shave their heads and to get on television. And they told me many times, we're going to use you today. And I digress slightly, but I'll throw this in. It was Pritchard was down there with Vince. And Vince goes, well, Parks, we can't use you tonight. And you look too much like a wrestler. Verbatim, truth to be sold. And that really blew my gasket. But before that, a couple of months beforehand, Vince had come up and I had my hair out and I was going to the makeup section to get the girls who still work there today.
Yeah.
Who do a wonderful job. Great ladies. I've forgotten their names again. Forgive my senility. But I'd go back to them and I just talked to Kurt Angle and Kurt says, yeah, tie your hair back. So I went back to get them done so I could get it all braided up into a little bun and make it disappear. So I had a full mane of hair when I was younger in those days, of course.
Yeah.
Waist length hair, so I get that up. But anyway, I go to the gorilla position we talked about earlier where they used to have a blackboard.
Yep.
See the matches. So I went to check if I was on the show for the night. So there was a couple of gaps still hadn't been penciled in, so they're still having production meetings. Vince comes around the corner. I just finished talking to Earl Hebner. And Vince comes around the corner, and Vince is and probably the biggest guy in the company at that stage. Vince is a big man.
Yeah, he is.
And he's larger than life. He's another guy. He's not intimidating so much to me as frightening, but he makes a presence. You know when.
Oh
Vince,
yeah.
So he talks up, hey pal. He talks like that for real. You know, throws out his hands. You know, to shake hands. How you doing, Parks? And he remembers everybody, you know.
Right on.
Vince is a very astute guy. The reason why he's the king of the hill.
Yeah.
And, he knows who everybody is, and he pays attention. There's stories and stuff we won't delve into right now with that, but he does pay attention. Threw out his hand, hey pal, thanks for coming. Thank me for coming down. Thanks, Vince, for having me. You know.
Yep.
Threw my hand, but I had my hair down with a cup of coffee. I just got out of catering. And I flung my hair back. It was all down. Of course, it went up as he threw his hand out. And of course, I had the cup of coffee. And like slow-mo, this cup of coffee flings out all over Vince's arm. And I go, oh, beep. Nevertheless, on that story, I wasn't on the show that night. I sat in catering and played cribbage with Haku. But yeah, that was But one of the last times I talked to Vince, I was like, he wasn't very impressed with wearing coffee all over him. And of course, I had my hair out, and that's the last thing he wanted to see. Was
right.
Be corporate. That's when the dress code came in, if people might remember, which was popular in the dirt sheets.
Yeah.
Vince went on a protocol where he wanted everybody to be in business casual before you come to the arenas. We'd all used to just turn up in our Zubazes and flip-flops and sing. Right. We just come from the plane or the airport with a gym or whatever, we turn up at the shows. This protocol had just started kicking in, you know. And for certain people, there was some certain others that would. And, of course, once you've done everything you did, you change back.
Yep.
Even though you're behind the scenes and nobody's seeing you, but once you leave the building, you're in a suit.
Yeah.
And so that protocol would just kicked in. So everything was everything was on edge, you know, because people were worried about wearing these clothes all the time. So at that stage there, I remember that when we came in, and I lost track of my point with my senility again, but the suit deal really changed a lot of things up with guys. And I won't mention a name, he wouldn't wear a suit, but John Cena. And just, he was a very humble guy in the early days. I've digressed off the topic, but just to touch on that lightly, John Cena was at that stage just breaking in.
Yep.
When I was doing a lot of TV tapings, and he was the humble guy who used to sit by himself in the corner, and had no association with anybody. He'd head down. He was very polite. I think he is still this day. I've never had any cross words with John Cena, but and he's done an amazing career from those days on as one of the biggest. And well done to him. He looks the part, great physical shape. But yeah, he was watching that digress. But he was one now later on as that clothing regulation came in that he would always be in singlet and cut off shorts and his sneakers, and he sort of got away with that. I think Shawn Michaels did too when he turned up, but they were the only couple that ever got away with it. Everybody else would be dressed, including Kane and Taker. Yeah. So yeah, they would all be suited up. Yeah, it was kind of amazing. But yeah, little fun stories from back in there in the locker rooms, and that of course, as I segue off that, has changed a lot too.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the business sense there's a lot different now, and how things run. But yeah, that was an unfortunate episode with Vince, and following a show probably several months later, the quick story as we move on, we'd gone to an arena, and it was in Detroit. I can't remember the arena over there. And I was only just telling the story to either Jericho or Lance Storm or somebody were laughing about it. And or Eddie Guerrero might have been the one. And we were in the there was some spiral staircases that led up to where the locker rooms were. We talked earlier that during that time there started to be segregation where people would get together, and so I'd find my group that I knew from more often, and you would go to those people, and that was that group. I think Chavo was in there at the time too, and we'd share the locker room, and which I'll progress on tell the people what used to happen after that too. I'll let the secret out how that changed from locker rooms to toilets. But down the thanks, guys. I don't know who did call. I don't think Vince called it, but it was somebody in the office. I don't mention any names. They're great gentlemen, but it was still a rough term. But long story short, there were spiral staircases, and so I again had my hair down. You think I'd learned for the first time from spilling on Vince, but I'd climb up the stairs, and those spiral ones are very tight. Yeah. Anyone any decent size would know those little spiral staircases just fit a normal width person. So anyway, I'm bumbling through, and I've got my head down, and I'm lamenting about something, hair hanging all over my face. And I walk straight up in there and walk straight into somebody. And I look straight up like this, and I raise my head and get a face full of bosom, because that person is standing, that female is standing 3 steps above me on that same spiral staircase.
Yeah.
And the words that came out of her mouth were different. It was like, "Are we okay?" With that really nasally voice. Yeah. I thought, oh, God, who have I offended here? One of the security ladies, somebody, any female. So, oh, God, I'm so sorry. No, it wasn't just a normal person. It was Stephanie.
Oh. First the coffee, now bumping into somebody as you're going up to yes, those spiral cases are very small. Like even when I was before my barbecue weight, like I like to say, they're still not that, maneuverable. No. So that had to be really embarrassing.
And just the shock of my face, I thought, well, nonetheless, I didn't work that night either. But as luck would have it. But yeah, that was just ironic, as a little side story there of that one. But yeah, of all people, it had to be Stephanie, and she wasn't very impressed with it either.
Right.
So, yeah, no, I think I spoke to once or twice after that. But yeah, the Tales of New York. Again, it's an experience for a lot of younger people these days. Hadn't come from the Midwest here, had a chance.
Yeah.
Of course, our mutual friend Eugene at that time was running the training camp down in the facility down the south at those years.
Yeah,
and come up into the company that stayed for live television. But it really became an experience for those few lucky people in the area that would come in and be allowed to be part of that, because it was very closed debt. As we talk today, some of the younger talent have again not to do what we've talked about. I walk 10 miles in bare feet to slow thing again. But it was a much harder deal to get within the company those days. You sent in a lot of tapes. You were scrutinised. You were viewed, and and then at certain stage you got to certain levels. You'd come in as an enhancement. Then you might be doing the jobs. You might be doing this, and then you might sit back here. Then you might be sat on the shelf for 6 months.
Yep.
Rush, because there was nowhere else to go. And they knew where you were and didn't chase them. But you had to qualify just to get there. Today, of course, it was an easier thing. You send in a picture and it's done via the internet, and suddenly you're on there.
Right.
So you had a lot of preparation, so you were treated a lot better in those days, as long as you didn't spill coffee and walk into somebody's boobies. But you. Today, it's a lot of cannon fodder, so it's very hard in that aspect for the talent today to make any difference, because they just bring them in by the dozens,
Right.
and you, and the rest of you, see you later type thing, and do nothing, and there's no usage, no investment in their abilities. They don't get seen. They don't get. Nobody cares. Those days you were put there by recall. You were picked out of the group. You were called up. You were turned here, and we're going to do something with you. So.
Right.
And then you had purpose being there, so they knew you, looked after you, and treated you well. Today's thing is a whole different world. It's a different machine, and I think some of the other bigger companies now have tended to come like that now too. On travels, including the foreign companies too, that were larger with TV stuff, became a bit like that as well too. Without sounding long-winded, but yeah, it's a different world. But WWF and was a great company. I think it's still good. Hopefully, you can do better and produce a good product for people and involve a lot more with younger Midwest talent. Hopefully soon,
Right.
we can see them up, because we've talked about a lot of talent that deserve a good run. And again, the wrestling game is not so much what you deserve; it's the old adage of right place, right time. Still
Right.
applies today too, But you have to be out there to be in the right place, right time. So you got to be
Right.
and that's the big key of that. But it's a different world. But we all got to adapt. Even us old schoolers that grumble and moan about it, I got to change it up too. As you see now, I've changed from what I was in the early days with a rebuilt image and look, name, and with the King, and creating a new personnel and something for other people to view and enjoy,
Right.
and change from your stuff and involvement. Not involvement, but involving in the business is a crucial part. And we talked about a mutual guy that we both know with Chris Jericho.
Yeah.
Great talent who's done exactly that, reinvents himself every period. I think that's vital in this flash age of 10 seconds, and if it's 10 seconds you've been watching this for 20 minutes talking, you've paid a better. Most people listening to us right now, but they've got a 10-second, attention span.
Yeah.
And, this is old all of a sudden. They haven't got the time to invest in stuff, people now. It's just a cultural thing. It is what it is. We ain't going to change it.
Right.
And we've got to adapt to it, So people are doing that, and we've seen that with great adage, with Undertaker himself do his own change. The greatest gimmick of all
Yeah.
We talked about Andre being the greatest wrestler of all time, but the greatest gimmick was the Undertaker. That's lasted, 30 plus years. I mean, he broke in 2 or 3 years before me.
Right.
His gimmick has lasted almost a day up. He did a little bit of stuff with his career earlier in the South.
Yeah.
He went to Vince in 1990, I believe. It was 30 years on the day. And created this thing and had 2 changes in there. Went to that biker thing and a few other variants. It was essentially the same thing. Rarity in itself that just gives testament to a guy who can pull that off. And a team that pulls it off. Everybody likes to say, wrestling, this guy's done everything.
Right.
But what you see on show is all part of people of the media like yourself. It's part of the guy setting the ring up. It's the guy running that lights that makes you look good. It's the other guy in the ring. It's your referee.
Right.
It's the people in the crowd. You didn't have crowd, which we don't have now. We're doing wrestling. You see the flavor change because the atmosphere is not created anymore. And the crowd is as vital as the other guy in the ring. As vital as the guy running the show, to the guy taking the tickets, to the girl putting the posters on the streets, to the guy doing the websites, to the graphics, it's all part and parcel, And we forget sometimes, I believe, and try and put all the stuff on. Like people when they go to a rock show, they band.
Right.
There was 4 guys on the stage. There was 150 that made that show.
Exactly.
That's the people. They don't make the show. They just sit in it.
Right.
Those are not controlled by the guy on the drums. He's not hitting the light buttons and making the pipe.
Right.
he's not even designing it. You know,
Yep.
They're just there. Don't stand here or you blow up. Okay.
Yep.
Keep going. Okay. You know, I play the drums, and that's a musician joke anyway. We don't call them musicians. There's four musicians and a drummer, but it's all teamwork, and we need to get back to that basics without sounding long-winded again, to where that person shines, but the people made him shine. So Undertaker filled his gimmick up. Mark did a great thing of creating a product, but it was all that team.
Right.
Everybody was in that marketing, from the office at Titan Towers to every guy in the ring with him to the whole basis of 30 years of people, which is thousands plus the people that came to the shows. Without that people being there, as we saw it, I never see it myself, and I'll go back and view it, though. You had this farewell thing done without a crowd.
Yeah.
Without the people there, because you feel the electricity. I've been in arenas. I haven't been in the ring with Mark. I've never wrestled Mark, and I've never been on the other side as he's come down the ramp. But I've been in the shows. It makes your skin tingle. It's an amazing thing to see. You're like, good God, this is something, you know.
Right.
But that's my little spiel on that.
Well, this would be a perfect time to actually start getting to the part of the end of the show. I actually wanted to ask you while we're on the show, not when we were talking before we started, but I'd like to have you come back in a couple weeks to be on the show and go in more depth on your TNA part, on the WCW part, and then kind of like go into this whole detail of what has changed, what you've seen, what you've liked about the new. But let's get to those questions that I usually ask to get it up. And I always ask 3 questions, and it's just random. So it's just like, okay, what would you prefer? Do you prefer Coke or do you prefer Pepsi?
Sprite.
There you go. Next question. Baseball or football? Now, I know that you being from Australia, there's a different term for football than there is in the States. So you have the right to answer it. Football as where you're knowledgeable in.
The correct answer, my dear brother of the barbecue, is cricket.
There you go. There you go. Okay, so here's the next question, because you live in Minnesota. Do you go for the Minnesota Vikings, or do you go for one of the other North Conference teams?
Oh, this might alienate me for some viewers here. I don't watch football at all. I'm a bit of a Loons fan.
That's perfect.
And for anybody out there, a quick caveat: if you get to watch FS Sports, FSN, Fox, so late night stuff, if you get a chance, look up Aussie Rules Football, and you'll see what's called murder on a field. I never watch. And we all grow up, and I played football as a child. I didn't do rugby. I did a little bit of soccer. And
I was going to ask you about that the next time you're on the show, too, about rugby, because I was a big fan of rugby. I still am. And you're legitimately in that area of where rugby is, so.
Well, we'll get in depth on that. I did watch a little bit. I'm still a fan of rugby, but I was always a big Aussie Rules fan.
Yeah.
And for any viewer out there, listener here today, if you get a chance, I strongly, and it sounds biased because it's a national sport for us,
right?
But it is the most. It's like hockey with basketball, with gridiron football, and rugby mixed in one. And it's all that combination of those sports in one thing, and it's live. It doesn't stop. There's no breaks. There's no commercials. It plays for 2 hours, and it's consistent, much like hockey is. And it's very entertaining if you want to see pure carnage. Just to put it on perspective, an average football player retires of Aussie Rules football at age 25.
Right.
Their career's done.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Put it into concept. My son had a Big Pal. There's a Big Pal program for the middle school kids. She played rugby. Right. Now, she was built and looked like Sable, but she hit like Brock Lesnar in football. It was crazy. I need to show you a video the next time that we get to have a chance before we record in a couple weeks. Legitimately picked the girl up and speared her down on the ground. Like, I've not I was scared. I wanted to run the other way. I did not want to ever see her, look at her ever again. Not because that I was upset. It's because I was legitimately scared. This girl was at least 3 inches taller, a lot more heavier, at just, oh yeah. My words don't even like how bad that hit was. It was bad. But let's tell the listeners where they can follow you on, if you have any of your social medias that you want everybody to follow. We will get the links from you, have them drop them in on our private messenger, and then I can put them on there on the video for the YouTube and for the podcast so people can reach you. So go ahead. The platform's yours.
The best place you can contact me is oldmaninabasement.com. No, I actually just made that up, but you can catch me on, there's a King Leonidas on Facebook. You can catch me on Jonathan P. Parks Facebook. There is an Instagram. I'll get the links to you because I'm again senile, and I do have a tweeter. I'm catching up with the technology for people out there. So there is a King Leonidas tweet and Instagram and Facebook out there. And again, we'll post the links. How we do it on the thing, we go down below, and I'll get them out to people if they'd like to follow and watch and catch up. I try and get as much content and updates of what we talked about today on there. I include a lot of other stuff outside of wrestling on there that people may find interesting. I throw on little things. Again, we talked about music earlier on in the habits. I people for Skyping on lessons. You can catch up on turns. I do a lot of musician work on there too, so you can see that sort of stuff if that interests you. Other bits and pieces, I link from other interviews and bits and pieces go on there too. So there's an array of stuff. And if there's not, leave a message in one of the mailboxes and say, I demand this or want this, and I'll get that forwarded on and have quick response to. There's a few of us that keep the box active. So again, you can catch me on Facebook, Instagram, under King Leonidas, Facebook under Johnny Parks. And hopefully you'll pop in, say hello. If you see this, mention that you watch this podcast and where you may have seen us or heard of me before, or DjBBQ, mention him, and we'll chat. I'm always open to talk to any people about ideas, anything you want to talk about. You
just gave me another idea. Why don't we, if you don't mind, we'll do 2 more shows, and one about your music and how you were had that passion there. I think that would be pretty cool because that would be out of the norm. I do like to do certain spotlight albums for the UnCut live show on the Kota Radio Network podcast, but I think that would be pretty cool. I think if you don't mind.
Absolutely. It's one of my other great loves. And we sit here, and I think people voicing their opinions about their music types. It's something when you find somebody with a connection, whether it be wrestling or a sport or music, you can sit there, and if that's your team or that's your wrestler or that's your band, you're going to sit here for 5 hours and talk about it. Everybody has a commonality with that brings people together. And I'm one of those love guys. I'm a fighter by nature, but I like to bring everybody together when I can. And we'll definitely do the music side there, and I'll showcase some guitars and maybe some requests. Well, we can go on and further on if anybody's interested in watching old man play 80s and 90s.
Hey, there is nothing wrong with the 80s music and the 90s music. I'm not. We could go on and on about the music of today because a lot of that stuff just seems like I can auto-tune anything and then I'd be popular. So. But my name is DjBBQ. This is Mr. Parks. Thank you once again for being on the show. Everybody else, you have a good night and peace.
Kota Radio Network is brought to you by Midwest All Pro Wrestling. Go to MidwestAllProWrestling.com and get tickets today. Remedy Brewing Company. It's the cure for what ails you. Jekyll and Hyde Barbecue. Jekyll and Hyde Barbecue makes barbecue so good, it'll put a smile on your face. And Kota Radio Network is powered by KBAC.Rock. Rock radio the way rock radio should be. Go to KBACradio.com and listen today.